Yay. Well, hello and happy Friday. Happy Valentine's Day. Um,
Right.
just thought I'd mention, just in case we forgot or didn't know, but we did you know that Saint Valentine was a real person? And he was just a little bit of history because he was a priest in Rome and he was imprisoned for marrying many couples, believing couples, and also he was persecuted for being a believer. That's why he ended up being martyred. So he was martyred on February 14th of 273 AD, because he refused to deny his faith. So, wow, thank you, Lord. Well, we bless you all on Valentine's Day. So, what we have, just as a recap quickly, there was a reneging on the a part of Hamas for saying they were not going to release hostages on Saturday. Thankfully, they are going to release three. The Islamic Jihadist Palestinian group are also going to release one. And I want to say, remember, we were praying for specifically, many of us took on prayer for individuals, hostages. One of the ones that was really on my heart actually was this. I've mentioned him before, Sasha. He is a Russian born. Let me just share this super quick so we can see who is getting released. These are the three men being released on Saturday. Let's pray everything goes through well. Sasha is this guy, and he is a Russian speaking guy who was Amazon worker actually, who was captured from Oz, near Oz, as all three of them were. Just to say, I showed this a long time ago, but this is his girlfriend, Safir Cohen, who was released earlier, after a month or so in captivity, 50 days. And she, by the way, had a real encounter with God. I don't know if you guys remember that, but she had an incredible story. You could look it up if you want. Just encountering God in the tunnels, such that she came out, with just transformed. She speaks about her transformation, her spiritual transformation. And so anyway, so it's her boyfriend, the Russian Israeli, that is going to be released. One of the guys going to be released on Saturday. Anyways, it's great because we keep praying for these. And good news is Itamar, who we pray for diligently, Iran's son, he has been released from Gaza this morning. So thank the Lord. He was deployed there, has been released. So that's a breathing air sigh of relief for his parents. Okay, awesome. So Jonathan LeDuc, you heard from before. Sharon had interviewed him, chief of, I don't exactly know exactly what your title is.
Chief of staff, yes.
Chief of staff. I was saying it right. Okay, chief of staff for JH Israel. So, Jonathan, we're looking forward to hearing also an update from your time in Israel at the National Leadership Center with Iran and vision for the future. So, thank you for sharing. All over to you.
You're welcome. Thanks. And Patricia, did you have Iran on Monday? Was it with this group?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So trying to determine how much to share. Well, just to start, great to be with you all. And, I want to start by a comment that General Krulak made. He was involved with JH Israel for years. He was the commandant or the number one in the Marine Corps. And he said this one time, you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to be there. And I've just been thinking about what it meant for me to be able to go over there alongside Norm Schultz. And as a sign of solidarity, because we've really been unable to get over there since this war effort started. And, when you've got family members that are pushing forward on your mission, but you're not able to really come alongside in a face-to-face way. It was just a huge sign of help and support for him that we made the effort to get over there. And so um, it was such a joy to be in the land again. I so look forward to people being able to go back over because we were one of very few tourists. And in many ways, we aren't tourists, but if you've been over before, you're used to seeing the buses everywhere. And in this case, there were essentially nobody. And that really allowed us time to kind of dive deep into first the National Leadership Center, where we had multiple days with the leadership there, but also some of the kids that are coming up. We've got this group we're calling the Nishon Institute. And one of our issues has been the turnover of staff members or trainers in the facility. They'll come for a year, you make these large investments to get them up to speed, but then, they basically head on. And so we thought, gosh, what would be a way to retain them? Maybe give them some scholarship money to stay at the universities, but have their place of employment be the National Leadership Center. And so the training was underway, but I was able to get an hour and a half with them and really just walk through the bigger story of JH, how the ranch really morphed into Outback, how JH Israel spun off of that, USIA, how that fits in. And it was just great to see these ladies nod. But one of them came up to me afterwards and she said, "What do you think about the significance of the NLC being in Judea and Samaria?" And my response was, I mean, it's incredibly significant because it's a show of, with the leadership center being in a contended area, that we're here and we're here to stay and we're here alongside you guys. And she just started breaking down in tears because she said, I used to live right near Gaza. And they essentially took our homes and settlements and folded it into Gaza. And we got removed and placed up here in REL. And so I feel like I always have to justify our existence, and where we live. And, just to have her hear me say, from our Christian standpoint, we view this area as incredibly important. She just walked away going, okay, I believe it, this much more in the purpose of the National Leadership Center, why we're here, how it's helping to do solidify the city of Ariel and this region. So we got to do several days of work at the National Leadership Center. We're talking about the budget, we're talking about our projects, and that's all exciting and fun. But then we also had an opportunity to go to the local high schools. And as a way of recognizing that only so many people can come to the Leadership Center, Tyre and Neve, who are really responsible for the content, they said, let's develop this whole breakout room experience and let's do it at workshops in the local high schools. So in 2024, we had over 6,000 kids go through, and we've been dreaming and scheming of how to have that morph into 16,000. You guys, to walk into a high school where you see generally a lot of kids pretty disengaged, there were 30 17-year-old boys. They were in groups of 5 and they were locked in for 90 minutes going through this experience. And it was so fun to watch them process through. If you've never been to a breakout room, it's riddles, it's codes. You're trying to solve problems, which unlock locks, which take you to the next phase. And what these guys did, Tyre and Yaniv, is they built this whole experience mirroring the different phases of Israel's history. So you had Abraham in that time period, and then Exodus and coming out, and then the exile leading all the way up into modern times. And so when we were getting to watch the part of it, they were having to read the Constitution of Israel. They had these little glass sliders over there, and they would find these 3 words in the Constitution, and that would give them this little code. Those code blocks that they would put onto this sheet that they would insert into this music player, they'd crank the music player and they'd hear, oh, that's the national anthem. They would have to hear a word in the national anthem that would lead to, the next phase. So, I'm just thinking about American students, who are unwilling to say the Pledge of Allegiance in their classes, because of the litigiousness of our society. And here they are doing a deep dive into their biblical heritage. And we're getting an opportunity to do this to over 6,000 students. It was just fantastic to see. And so we were dreaming about hiring more trainers. What does 2.0 look like? And one of the fun parts is, in us going to them, they get exposed to this community, this group that's attached to the Leadership Center. And then they start asking the question, hey, is it possible for us to go to the Leadership Center to get more of an experience like this, but now to start utilizing the ropes courses? So when we say the workshops or the high school, that's really what it is. And boy, it just far exceeded my expectations. Um, Next day, I had an opportunity to go to Jerusalem. And this also blew my mind because just as when you're in Judea and Samaria, you're going over the green line, there's this armistice line, and many in Israel still don't believe that's Israel proper. And then there's always this question of, gosh, why are you there? I spoke to that. Well, you have a whole lot of people, particularly during war, that are going, I'm not going to send my kids into that area. I mean, there's way too many Palestinian villages right around there. If you had something inside of Israel proper, or maybe around Jerusalem, I'd be all about it. Well, there is let's just call it a conference center. It is a hotel with 40 rooms. There are swimming pools, there are tennis courts, basketball courts, and this place is literally sitting vacant. So we have, over the past 3 years, gone and looked at it and said, what would it be like to utilize our content at this facility? Well, we met with the director of the place, and I don't really know what he's directing because when you have zero programs, I think you're trying to justify your existence. And his words to Iran were, kick in the door, force, basically bring your programs here, start setting up establishment and shop because this place needs you guys. And we're looking at it going, and we could just explode our impact and effort if we're able to use this because of its geographic location. So, just to speak real quickly to where it's at, if you've been to New York City, it's this zoo of a city. But if you go into Central Park, there's just this hamlet where there's peace and there's beauty, and you can actually hear a bird. And that's what this little Jerusalem forest is. And it's on this mountainside called Mount Herzl. Well, Mount Herzl, if you were just to think of my arm being the mountain, at the very top of Mount Herzl is where Theodor Herzl is buried. And he's essentially the father of Zionism, coming back into the land. And it's their Arlington Cemetery. It is where all of the presidents and prime ministers and are buried. Well, right below that, think 100 yards, you have Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum. So while we were there, we saw probably 300 soldiers, and they were privates in the IDF, and they were basically just doing a historical tour. They're going to these cemeteries and memorial sites. They're getting an understanding of what really established Zionism, with the coming out of the World War II and the Holocaust, and the world being aware that the Israelis need a land. And then right below it is this whole forest called the Jerusalem Forest, which is a public park. But think maybe it's 400 or 500 acres. It's gorgeous. And then embedded inside of that is this Zipporah forest. And that's the privately held land with this whole facility that is saying, come and use it. And then to boot, at the very bottom is this beautiful little town called En Kerem. And En Kerem is the birthplace of John the Baptist. It's where Elizabeth and Mary met, and John leapt in Elizabeth's womb. And I mean, it couldn't be more significant, symbolic. And they're just basically begging us to come. And so Iran and I are just walking around this property with Yaniv, who's written this whole content of what's the thread connecting us to Zionism, and literally them going to be walking up, connected together through these specific areas on the hillside. And it was just one of those, okay, God, I love your favor because they're asking us if we were to try and build this, it would cost $10 million to try and recreate this thing. And they're literally saying you can use it for free if you will just subsidize the people coming. So we're going to do some pilot programs where we're basically doing a couple of the groups that we would normally do at the NLC. We're just going to plop them onto the Sapori Forest, feel out what it's like, what do we need, and then start discussing, okay, what does a long-term relationship look like with them? Because where we really want to go with this is having a parent son daughter overnight experience. Just like we have Outback where they'll come in on Friday evening, they'll spend Saturday night, Sunday. We're thinking you can have so much more of an impact the longer the time you have with them. But how do we get there from here? I mean, you got to think about staffing, the infrastructure. And our biggest issue back at the NLC and REL is we don't really have an overnight stay. We to the hotel near us is, you know, it leaves a lot to be desired. And they're really not open for us to stay there. And so where do we house these people and how do we do the food? Well, this hotel is literally sitting there. And so we're thinking, hey, short term would be the day use, but longer term, the thing I want you guys to be praying into is when you start impacting the parent right along with the child, you start getting a whole lot more traction and transformation inside of that family unit. And so the big dream, desire, goal is to have these Outback experiences. We call it Outback, we'll call it something different in Israel and likely at that facility. Final thing I want to say was caught me by surprise is I had said, gosh, would it be possible to see a little bit of that Gaza area? And so we went down, we were within a mile of the Gazan wall, and we were at this kibbutz called Far Aza, and it's probably the closest kibbutz to where that wall is. And what I thought was, maybe it was 50 terrorists, jumping the wall and coming over. I just had no idea the scope and scale of what that day was like for them when in three different waves, 3,000 terrorists came over. And what was very humbling, eye-opening was the tour guide we had was really a lady that lived there. And think of it as a small suburb, 800 people live there. And in an instant, nobody lives there. So it's kind of a time capsule. And she, of course, they've been back together their stuff, but they can't really go in because, who's running the trash? Is the water turned on? All of those things. Plus, there's just so many memories of what took place there. And the hardest part about the whole experiences was you have the wall that's the closest to Gaza, and then the first buildings that they had was the student housing. Like many of us, college students are tend to be loud and they have parties at night. And so they've kind of located them to the edge of town. Well, that edge was the one right near Gaza. And so these terrorists, essentially were very well planned, and they came over and they set up shop around the armory where they keep the assault weapons to defend the place, and they just picked off the people that tried to come. And then they went systematically through the student housing areas, and we were able to walk through some of them. And I mean, as a parent, you just think, well, one of the hardest parts, I couldn't read it or else I'd probably still be in tears, is they would post the text messages that these kids were texting their parents who, were maybe 50 yards away in their homes. It's like, Dad, they're right outside. We've got the doors locked, but they're trying to break in. And these people were in these safe houses in their homes for 22 hours while they just continued to hear these terrorists trying to break in, and it literally looks like a war zone. It's sad and disgusting. But to hear it from the eyes of somebody who had to live through it, who knew every single one of those 34 members of the kibbutz was killed, it just gave me such a level of conviction to say, this is why we're here. This is why we're doing what we're doing, not just for leadership development, but much of our curriculum is now shifting to focus on trauma recovery and PTSD and helping with the widows and orphans because there are 1,400 people that what died that day. um, by percentages, I mean 9/11 killed like 900 people for us, but by population, that's about 45,000 people if you were doing, the ratio of US citizens to how many died first and how many died for the Israeli citizenship. So it just so is pervasive throughout the entirety of the country. I mean, you can't look anywhere without seeing a sign that says, bring them home now. And you could see the specific hostages that are still there. And in this kibbutz, there was a guy named Keith. Keith is actually a North Carolina born Israeli. And I was looking at his house in the kibbutz with his sign, and that day he was released. So it was really beautiful in one sense to see them coming around and trying to recover. And yet, how do you recover from something that's continually ongoing? I mean, until those hostages are out, they're not going to feel like there's a cessation of this. So we went from that kibbutz to the Nova Festival.
Mm.
And, again, equally sobering when you see the 360 little plaques and memorials with a little bio about these individuals, seeing the heroism for how many people were able to go out but would come right back with their vehicle and try and get more people out. It was disgusting and sad, and yet you just see the conviction of these Israelis saying, you know what, we're going to protect ourselves and we're going to continue to sow into this next generation. And when I come home, I think, gosh, what is my role? It's educating people about how they're doing, what's going on, the reality on the ground, but also forward thinking of how do we lean in and just create places and experiences so that they really can in hope look forward to a brighter day, a new future, getting those hostages returned, and going through that healing process together. So
Wow. Wow.
that's a lot of info,
That was
but
very
there we
good.
are.
That was excellent.
Yeah.
Just this morning, by the way, the IDF chief, Herzi Halevi, apologized to the four recently released hostages, the girls who were warning. Remember the girls that were on the intel there near the border where he's talking about, and they had released messages, warnings that were ignored. So they were just apologized to. We don't normally do this, but for some reason I feel to open this up for maybe a couple questions for Jonathan. That was amazing to see what's in the works and what the National Leadership Center is doing. And by the way, I put it in the chat. You can have a look at that again. But is there any questions that somebody has for him that's kind of burning on your heart, or just unmute yourself? If that's the case. Yeah. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit more about just how you found Iran and Khali and just your perspective on how they and the team is doing? Like, how can we pray for them more?
Hmm.
What did you see as a coworker and leader?
Yeah. Great question, Sarah. So when I was at the Leadership Center, it's very forward leaning and they were very positive. It's kind of like you're finally here, and they were very encouraged. And even as we dove into the business side, Iran is just so thankful for the opportunity, the new day and age that we find ourselves in. And because we have a 15-year relationship together, it's kind of like we don't have to posture in any way. It's just, hey, let's dive in. I will say that I closed my time out by going to Shabbat with Iran. And this was the first time in I don't know how many years that he had both the boys there. So it was a little bit like, oh gosh, this is, should I really be in this room? You know, and probably the hardest part was, he's got two boys, Jonathan and Idamar. Jonathan's been on kind of this world tour, find himself, he'd been in India, and he was the most communicative. But Idamar was basically a shell of his former self. And I think a lot had to do with, he's basically on leave for 5 days, and then he knows he has to go back. So I'm putting words in his mouth because he really wasn't communicating much. But it's kind of like this, I can't really let down because I know I have to go right back. And I don't want to go through that whole cycle of emotions again. So I'm just going to kind of stay in point. So,
Wow.
when somebody's with you, but they're not really with you, that's what that felt like for him. And
Wow.
as much as I was trying to, pull out conversation, it was pulling teeth. And so when I think about the prayer request, it's really, kids grow up pretty quickly the moment bullets start getting fired at them. And the things that they, as the youth of that nation, have experienced, and the expedited maturation that has to happen when you are literally fighting for your life. is something that's going to take a long time for them to come to terms with. So,
Right. Wow.
Levavit and Iran were ecstatic, that I was not only there, but the boys were finally there. And, I think Levavit had enough food for all of us on this call, but, that's the love language
Yeah.
of an Israeli mom. So, they were great. And yet at the same time, there's pain in the eyes.
Wow. Thank you for that. That was a good question too. Thank you. Anybody else had a question for Jonathan? Or we shift to prayer?
Jonathan, I'd like, we had Iran on Monday and he talked about the overwhelming responsibility they feel at the NLC of being tasked with trying to help heal the nation and the widows and the orphans. And so I said, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And I feel like that if you could just speak into that about how that um, the responsibility that they feel, that is such a huge prayer for us to lift them up, be their Aaron and hers. Do you have anything to say on that?
Yes. And I'll start by saying that I actually came home and felt a lot of that same thing. I mean, I went in to get a cardiologist checking my EKG because of just the weight of what I felt like. Oh my gosh, is this stress or a heart attack? You know? And, when you just see the volume of need, you continue to have to break it down and say, okay, well, what can we do? And when I think about what Aaron and Hur did, you positioned Moses in such a way, or Joshua, that
Moses.
they could really help support and go the long haul. And I think about what our role is in helping go the long haul is to say, well, we've got to bring in some counselors that this is their specific training because trainers that are 19 don't have this wealth of experience. So we're trying to build the plane as we're flying it. And one of the things that I just continue to think about is the significance of what intercessors do. They're the aerial support that's basically nuking a lot of the enemy before the ground troops go in. And that I think is what is needed, whether it's favor or bringing the right people that come in and say, oh yeah, I'm rolling up my sleeves, I'm here. And then recognizing that, gosh, unless the Lord builds the house, right? Those labor in vain. Like, Iran, you can't do more than you're doing. I mean, you are working so many hours already. So let's just break this down and we can create vision for all we want to do. But there is a season and a time right now to deal with this issue. So let's pivot our curriculum and really go after this demographic because it's not limited to just, the students we might typically serve. But we've got to figure out how to take what's existing pivot, make some of those tweaks and changes, and recognize that big, lofty goals for transformation when their need is like, I just need to hug my kid. And I need that moment when I'm staring into their eyes for 3 minutes as part of one of our activities. Like that will be more meaningful than taking them on a ropes course, that type thing. And that's where our conversation continues to orbit around, Sharon.
Very good. Very good. Last question on the chat. What is the financial need for this new expansion? Do you want to just speak into that quick and then we'll pray. And by the way, again, I'll put in the chat, I already did, but I'll put in the chat how to give to the National Leadership Center through JH Israel, but financial need,
Yeah.
John?
Boy, I really wish I was more equipped for this. I, I'll just say this: we will communicate more about this. Right now, where we stand, if they're basically saying, "Come use our property," we don't know what this long-term commitment will be as far as the facility. We know this: we really need God to move on the hearts of a lot of new trainers and how to get them trained up. Because again, think about the Nishan group. I mean, retention of staff or our trainers is probably one of our more difficult challenges. Well, you scale this up with this whole another project, and that's where it's going to be our point of pain. So
Right.
um, I really would be shooting in the dark to say this. I will say there's a lot of money coming in to address the war and trauma, but it's kind of like, but who's doing it, and where do we help? And so a little bit like the Red Cross, you have an emergency and you get this wave of funds, but it's like we need people on the ground to figure out where the needs are. That's really been our role. Is we're on the ground, we're seeing the need, we've got a mechanism for delivery, but now we've got to pair those up and then figure out what in the world this is going to cost.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Who's the target? Who's the target audience? Is it there that you're
Well,
focused on?
yeah, we've got widows and orphans. So we've got a couple of those groups that have been going through. That's going to expand. And everybody's affected in one way or another because of the size of the country. So what we have found is when we say trauma recovery, we will have high school students that want to talk about it as much as we'll have the parent-child want to talk about it.
Mm,
So when I say the target audience, it basically is, well, we really don't serve something below age 12, just from the nature of our facilities, all the way up through adults. But what's our mechanism in with then? It's either the Ministry of Education with these groups that have, already been contracted to come, or it's through the IDF and the high schools. So it's one of those three that, are our feeders.
okay. I think my understanding is kids, they do have certain days, right? Because we saw Iran put a video of the children coming for a day of fun with parents.
Yeah.
So that happens one-off. Mark,
Yeah, those are REL local kids kind of getting an opportunity to come in and enjoy.
great. Mark, last question. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, Jonathan, do you feel hopeful?
Oh, absolutely. And I should say Iran is very hopeful too. Um, when you have the hope inside of your heart, you come over there and you can continue to help lift their heads and just give them hugs and say, hey, the sign of us being here with you is going to go. It's that opening comment I made. It's going to serve you more to just know that we've got your back. We're here with you. We're with you on the journey. And that, I think, is what has breathed so much life into Iran and the team, is just, hey, we haven't flinched in our engagement with you guys. In fact, we're doubling down on the resources we're going to provide, increasing that, the time and attention that we're given. So 100%, Mark.
Very good. Very good. Getting back to Viktor Frankl, from the psychologist who was a concentration camp survivor, is his books, The Meaning of Life, Hope. The ones who had hope were the ones that were able to live and survive. Sharon, why don't we launch in prayer? Do you want to